Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom. We are presenting a highlight reel of our top 14 most popular TV editions, starting with the book, A Life Sacred and Profane, Caravaggio.
Absolutely. What's extraordinary about Caravaggio is that not only is he one of the greatest painters who ever lived, but also we have this absolute wealth, this treasure trove of real hard, fascinating historical information about him.
All right.
Particularly in Rome, because unlike London, where the Great Fire has destroyed almost all the archives, so that we know nothing virtually about Shakespeare, Caravaggio's contemporary.
Right.
In Rome, those archives never have been destroyed, and they contain, as I say, a wealth of information about him. So what I've tried to do is put that information together and give you the man rather than the myth.
And you have. It's an incredibly good read. And why do you think Caravaggio's work has such an appeal to the modern world?
I think it's because he's such an extraordinarily direct artist.
Okay.
And so when he paints...
it's so realistic then.
Yeah, he and dramatic.
Yes.
So when he paints a particular scene from the Bible, he goes straight to the heart of the emotion of that scene. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's the denial of Christ or the seizing of Christ, he takes you straight to the heart of it. So you don't necessarily need to be a Christian believer to find the paintings exciting, thrilling. It's the depth of humanity that I think speaks across the ages.
Yeah. Our next book is Circle of Treason, a CIA account of traitor Aldrich Ames and the men he betrayed.
Again, while we're trying to determine what in the heck happened, the KGB, mm-hmm. still busy with arrests, mm-hmm. still busy with executions, initiated the first of two deception operations against us. Okay. The first one I won't go into because you mentioned the second one. The second one did not start until June 1988. Okay. And continued for about 3 years. And it all happened when unidentified Soviet male approached our chief of station in Moscow on the train from Moscow to then Leningrad. Mm-hmm. Handed our chief an envelope. Mm-hmm. This individual subsequently identified himself as Zhomov, Alexander Zhomov. And it was going to be quite a find for us. Okay. He was not only a staff KGB officer, he was assigned to the component in the KGB in Moscow that ran all operations against our station.
Yes.
And in the envelope he had passed, there were several KGB documents, one of which was of great interest to us. Okay. It was the KGB assessment of the activities of our Moscow station from '84 to the end of '86. Obviously a critical period for us. Yes. Because that's where we lost a lot of our cases. They were arrested in Moscow. The KGB concluded that the reason for their successes and our losses, one reason only, it was our fault. Oh, yeah. Poor tradecraft by our officers. So, that alone mm-hmm. would give one pause.
Yeah. In our next book, Impossible Odds, the kidnapping of Jessica Buchanan and her dramatic rescue by SEAL Team 6.
It took about close to a year before I felt ready enough to sit down. And the whole point of writing it was for our son to have something to look back on, and also to be able to say thank you to all the people that had worked endlessly and tirelessly to get me out.
And what did you think, Eric, about writing the book?
No, I felt like as long as Jess could feel confident doing it mm-hmm. and that it wouldn't have a negative impact on her, then I felt like it was the right thing mm-hmm. to do, because just like Jess said, we had so many people that had worked, and I knew the hours they had put in, many of them.
Now, Jessica, tell us about the vivid cast of characters who kidnapped you. Describe a couple of the more memorable ones. I remember reading about the Somali man who was very kind to mm-hmm. you, but then there was another one who was extremely scary. It looked like he was about ready to rape you. Yeah. So describe what those two men were like.
Yeah. Well, the nicer one, we had nicknames for everybody so that we could kind of talk about them without them knowing it. And so we nicknamed him Helper because he was a helper of sorts. He would come with a mango, for instance, or he would
a piece of fruit for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Or later on, as the months wore on, he had information about what was going on, and he spoke a little bit of English, so that helped as well, just to give you somebody to communicate with. I also deeply believe that he stayed very close to me, so he slept next to me every night, and I think he did that as a way to protect me from.
Great. Our next book, The Richest Man in the World, the story of Adnan Khashoggi. Now, how did Khashoggi profit substantially by trying to tie together two U.S. defense companies, Northrop and Lockheed Martin, to do business in Saudi Arabia?
Well, every time Khashoggi made a deal for arms, he would kick back a certain percentage to the king. And that was the secret to his success. And then he would spend it all. And that's why when he finally died in 2017 in London, he really didn't have
Anything
many
left?
assets. No.
But he basically represented both Northrop and Lockheed Martin, correct?
Yeah, and other companies throughout the world. You know, he
Other defense companies throughout the world, right?
right. Yeah,
It didn't matter, right?
No. He was the world's biggest arms dealer, and he operated in Asia. And
in terms of
Europe.
arms would be like tanks and missiles, and what else would
Yeah.
be and guns and
Airplanes.
Airplanes.
You know. Frank Church came in, and in the end, Congress passed laws prohibiting foreign payments, which were bribes. I think companies still try to get around that somehow, but that's one of the results of Khashoggi's activities, which is the laws prohibiting these bribes.
Yes. Our next book, Trotsky in New York, 1917, a radical on the eve of revolution.
The Russian Tsar was toppled in March of 1917. The Russian Revolution was people forget, it was really two revolutions.
Okay.
In March of 1917.
The end of March, right?
Kind of the middle of March of 1917. Conditions in Russia after several years of war were terrible.
Yes.
There was mass starvation. The army had been demoralized. There were food shortages. There were millions of refugees from the war.
A lot of wounded people.
A lot of wounded people. 3 million Russian soldiers had been killed in fighting. Not to mention millions more were.
Yes.
It was a real tragedy. And that winter, it was a very cold winter, and food riots broke out in Petrograd, which was the name for St. Petersburg back then. And the Tsar ordered the military to crush the demonstrations. However, the military at that point was so disaffected that the army soldiers mutinied against their officers and joined the demonstrators in the streets. So in March 1917, this huge, spontaneous grassroots uprising came and toppled the Tsar. And the Tsar was replaced in the chaos that followed by a so-called provisional government, which was a committee of Duma members, parliament members, who tried to establish order.
But Trotsky didn't want that, did
Trotsky didn't want that. Trotsky was still in America. At that moment, most of the Bolshevik leaders, the revolutionary leaders, were all abroad. Lenin was in Switzerland, Zinoviev was in Switzerland.
They'd all been expelled, basically.
Yes, Stalin was in Siberia. And Petrograd, Russia, suddenly was one of the freest countries in the world. There was jubilation around the world.
Brand new government,
yes,
right?
brand new government. In America, Woodrow Wilson recognized the new Russian government within the week because they thought this was a great, wonderful breakthrough, freedom,
New development.
development. But during those, one of the first things the provisional government did was to invite all the radicals to come back home. And so when Trotsky escaped from Siberia in 1902, he left his wife and 2 daughters behind. A very controversial moment in Trotsky's life, a very wrenching moment, but very controversial. Critics of Trotsky would point to that for years and years afterward as a sign of bad character. But shortly after that, when he made his way to the West, and he stopped in Paris. And in Paris, he met another woman, Natalia Sadova. They had a romance, and she became his common-law wife for the rest of his life. She became essentially his life partner. Even though he was never divorced from his first wife, she became his common-law wife and the mother of his 2 sons.
Yes. Our next book, Isabella, the Warrior Queen.
And that one was an effort really to marry her to someone of not quite high status, to sort of push her out of the line of succession. And this was a man who had caused problems already for her mother, and so it was in Isabel's eyes a very insulting proposed match, and in fact she talked about killing herself to avoid marrying him. Then of course she considered herself very fortunate that her prayers were answered and the man mysteriously dropped dead.
That was amazing. But what I thought was dramatic was that she was on her knees for 2 days praying that either she would die or he would die.
Yes.
And boom, he drops dead.
Yes, yes,
that is amazing.
yes, yes. Quite a coincidence. Some might wonder.
That was very dramatic.
What happened is once Enrique made it so clear he was opposed to the marriage, the current pope didn't want to cross the King of Spain by giving her the dispensation. So they had to wait till that pope died and a new one was appointed.
And of course, at that time, the popes died pretty quickly, didn't they? Because they were at old age when they took the job, so they didn't usually last that long, did they?
Well, popes do get the job pretty late in life.
This book is Cardinal Rodrigo de Borja, who was a nephew of Pope Calixtus III, who you wrote that he was the consummate Renaissance man who loved to party with many women. He's a cardinal, but he's partying with women. Well, how did his arrival in Aragon in 1472 affect Princess Isabella's life?
Well, he was a rising star in the Vatican hierarchy, Rodrigo Borgia, and he also happened to be Spanish subject.
Okay.
So he felt a sort of sense of vassalage and duty to Ferdinand and Isabel. And he came to visit. He was actually trying to raise money for a Christian army to fight the Turks.
Okay.
And so he came to Spain with his hand out for money to raise an army. And he had some success at that in Spain, but what really happened is he developed a friendship and a rapport with Ferdinand and Isabella, in which he became a very important supporter of theirs, ally.
And was he financially helping them too?
Not initially at first, but it became incredibly valuable when he became Pope himself.
Yes.
And he became Pope Alexander VI, the infamous Borgia Pope. This became incredibly valuable to Isabel because when she sent Columbus to the New World and he came back and said he'd found lands, she sent fast horses to the Vatican to her friend Rodrigo Borgia, now the Pope, and asked him to declare all those lands hers. And he was glad to do so.
So that really made Spain wealthy, didn't it?
So that made Castile, gave Castile,
in Spain,
the Kingdom of Castile, Isabel's kingdom, control in the mind of the Christian world at that time. It gave her dominance over the entire New World.
Incredible.
Our next book, The Unexpected President, The Life and Times of Chester A. Arthur.
Garfield lingered throughout that summer of 1881, and at first people thought for sure he would die, and then there was a period when they thought he would recover, and then it was up and down that whole summer, and Americans followed that very carefully.
And I love the way you say all the people in New York are rushing to read the newspapers to see how is Garfield doing now?
Right,
because he'd have weeks where he'd be stronger, and then he'd have a setback, right?
That's right. It was very dramatic, and then towards the end of the summer in September, they took as Garfield's condition seemed to deteriorate, they took him out of Washington, which was considered to be unhealthy, especially
the swamp,
near the
right?
White House in the swamp. Took him up to New Jersey to be near the water. But unfortunately, he died there, and Arthur became president, and people were horrified at the prospect of this guy becoming president. He was
he was seen as
widely
corrupt,
considered as corrupt, unqualified. He had very little experience. One person made a comment about him and his placement as vice president. The only office he ever held was the one he was removed from. So basically, his main qualification for being on that ticket was ostensibly was being collector of the custom house, and he'd been fired for being corrupt.
Our next book, War is a Lie.
General Manuel Noriega, who worked for the CIA, included in you wrote that his biggest offense was he refused to back the U.S. war against Nicaragua during the Reagan administration. Well, tell us more about Noriega, who supposedly, and this is in your book, snorted cocaine in red underwear with women who were not his wife.
Well, I'm citing there the media case, the propaganda case for the war, which is, of course, ludicrous. It's not a reason to go bomb people in another country who don't really have a military to speak of, who are no threat to you, to go and bomb them because of these characteristics of their leader, who, as I note, a short time before, like Gaddafi, like Assad, like Hussein, and on and on and on, had been an ally and an employee and a weapons customer. And so these dictators that the United States exports and props up and supports can become too independent or simply too convenient a target, and then they're demonized and used as a war justification.
It's amazing. Well, can you list some of the countries where the United States has overthrown various governments? Can you list some of these countries?
Well, we don't have a long enough show, but
I mean, I couldn't believe it was like 2 paragraphs of countries.
Well, there are at least 36 cases of the United States successfully overthrowing a country's government, many of them democracies, since World War II. There are 50 or more, over 50 cases of assassinations and attempted assassinations of foreign leaders, 90 to 100 at least interferences with foreign elections, which, Russia, to the extent that it does this, is amateur stuff.
Our next book, Not for Sale: How to Survive and Thrive in a World That Wants to Control You.
And why was it so bad?
I think because of me. I don't fit in their organization. What I find is, okay, I try to explain this delicately because there will be corporate people reading this, but the corporate chieftain has to spends most of the day protecting his or her power.
Okay.
And so it changes from running the business and growing the business to becoming nervous that anything...
Like a bureaucracy, right?
That's right. Anything that's coming up the ranks... but I'm not trying to take their job.
Okay.
Like I would say, it doesn't make any sense what we're doing here. It's not going to work. And they would become threatened by that, and then they would try to have like this surreptitious campaign to
get rid of you.
Slowly. They would have me try to step in potholes and stuff.
Right.
And I notice it happens all the time, and it's always going to happen, and I'm not a fit for the corporate system. Some people are a fit for that. Mm-hmm. Now, what you're in an enclosure, and you behave well, and you get a guaranteed mediocre outcome.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find much bliss in the corporate system. And people are terrified to not be in it. And they have all these things they've come up with. Like, you got to have medical insurance. But you actually don't have, it's not like a rule that you have to have medical insurance.
Really?
Just saying. I mean, we believe that, but
we do.
It's like, do you really have to do? If you played that out to the psychological kind of extreme, the philosophy of the whole thing, you have all these rules.
Okay.
And these are all designed to make you feel safe.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is that I had scenarios where things became unsafe because of being stomped out.
Our next book, Stalin's Secret Agents.
During the war, the Soviets sent all kinds of people over here to go into our war production facilities and to share information. They were given stuff, and they, of course, built on top of that to get even more stuff. And they were not being hindered. They were not being prevented. It was a wide open situation.
Market, yeah, that's right. They were being given the information. Well,
right.
I thought it was also interesting. You described the Russian-Japanese relationship during World War II. You wrote that the Russians were assisting the Japanese against the Allies during World War II because of a neutrality treaty that Russia had with Japan.
Yeah, the way it worked was that the Russians were experts at maneuver, and they sat out the Pacific War. People don't realize this.
They did nothing, right? They
did worse than nothing, because as you just said, they actually aided the Japanese, according to the OSS data that we have, by getting, Lend-Lease was being shipped by the Pacific to Russia from us. They diverted, the Russians, some of this Lend-Lease stuff to the Japanese in exchange for stuff they wanted from the Japanese. So they not only did nothing to help fight the Japanese, but they actually assisted the Japanese according to this information. They then got into the war in August of 1945, this is ancient history for your viewers. 5 or 6 days before it ended.
Right. That's when they got into it.
Right. I think 5 days is accurate. I say 5 in the book. And that, they thought, entitled them to help dictate what happened in Japan after we fought for 4 years.
And all the money we spent. And
And the lives.
And the
The
lives.
lives that were lost. And they were given all kinds of stuff to get them into that war by Roosevelt at Yalta.
Incredible, incredible. Oh, I want to get to Yalta.
Our next book, Betrayal in Berlin, the true story of the Cold War's most audacious espionage operation.
I just found your stories about George Blake so compelling because he was such a spy. He started off in North Korea. Can you tell us, give us a brief history of George and his impact on the operation? Tell us his early history.
Yeah, I mean, he'd already led an amazing life even before he got to North Korea. I mean, all kinds of espionage and daring do. He was born.
He was like a James Bond, wasn't he, in a way?
In a way, he was very mild mannered. But his father was a Turkish subject who fought for the British Army in World War I. At the end of World War I, had been sent to Holland and met a Dutch woman, and they married. And their child was George, named after King George of England. And young George Blake, his father died when he was quite young, and he was sent to Egypt to live with wealthy relatives who could see to his schooling. So he lived this fantastic life for a few years in Cairo, living on this island in the Nile, with fancy servants, and kind of this double life that he was going through already. He'd go back to Holland on the summer vacations, and he was there when World War II broke out, and he was kept there, and the Nazis invaded Holland, and Blake ended up going underground and working as a schoolboy courier for the Dutch resistance, peddling around, bringing messages back and forth, and then escaping across Europe when he feared arrest, and across the snowy Pyrenees Mountains, making his way to England. And they're so impressed by him that the British Secret Intelligence Service recruits him.
And he knows so many languages. He knows like 3 or 4 languages fluently.
Yeah, he does at this point. Obviously, Dutch and English and French and
Russian, right?
He eventually will learn Russian at this point. Not yet, but so he's very useful, and he's already had a life of kind of on double life on the road, and quite accomplished.
Our next book, The Stephen Decatur House, A History.
So the burning of the Philadelphia happened during the First War with the Barbary States, which is really about
they're pirates, right?
Right. It's about
in the Mediterranean.
It's about American vessels in the Mediterranean being captured and their crews captured and held for ransom. And again, it's a really important military engagement for the young American republic. And so what happens is in late 1803, under the command of Bainbridge, the Philadelphia runs aground outside the harbor in Tripoli. It runs aground on what is a sort of an uncharted reef, right? So
off North Africa,
Yes, and right outside the harbor at Tripoli. And so the Tripolitan commanders capture the ship off the reef along with its crew, and they bring it into the harbor at Tripoli. And so, of course, this is a concern to the American Navy for many reasons. They're worried about the crew. They don't want the ship to be damaged or to be held there as this, demonstration.
And it's a very small Navy to begin with, right?
Exactly. And so they develop a plan for coming into the harbor at Tripoli and either returning or burning, the Philadelphia. Either they're going to bring the Philadelphia if they can, recapture it, bring it out of the harbor, repair it, and then take it, back to the United States ultimately, or they're going to destroy it. And so the person tasked with leading this command, this mission, is Stephen Decatur. So he is at the time in charge of, in command of a of a small ship called the Intrepid. And so what happens is, I think it's February of 1804, in command of the Intrepid, Decatur sails it into the harbor at Tripoli. Now, he does so on an almost moonless night. There is a little crescent of a moon, so it's sort of under the cover of darkness. And the plan is they disguise the Intrepid to look like a trading vessel from Malta.
And there's no motor here. They're just sailing.
Oh, no,
right?
he's sailing. Now, again, Decatur is an exceptional sailor. He went to sea for the first time at the age of 8. His father was Stephen Decatur Sr. is an important naval officer in the Revolution.
Right.
So,
Our next book, Golden Orchid, the true story of an only child in contemporary China.
I think there's so many accounts about China, and I want to tell my own story. China is a very diverse, country. My story examined the ordinary life. I wasn't, come from a very affluent family, and their story usually is untold. How we deal with cancer, treatments, medical care. In Guangzhou, big city as it is, we still have a lot of obstacles. How the differences over different generations. My parents' generation and the only child generation, and also how similar we are. Actually, when I wrote that book, I gave it to a couple of American teachers to read. Said, "Well, this is exactly what happened to me."
Exactly. That's what I was thinking as I was reading your book, because my parent died from colon cancer. And I thought to myself, this is exactly the same kind of thing that happened in the hospital room, with the relatives, and it was just the same kind of sadness and difficulty and despair, of feelings of despair, because the medical establishment was not going to come through here.
Right, and because there's so many different. I mean, we always emphasize on differences of our appearance, our nationality, but actually there are a lot of similarities.
There are a lot of similarities, because
Our next book, The Artificial Intelligence Contagion.
There is such a pro-AI robotics movement now, by businesses, even some governments,
manufacturing,
banks, the whole range of things there, and researchers, university researchers in technology, whose future they hope to get a patent that will make them $1 billion.
Oh my gosh!
So there are all kinds of, and it's an ego thing. Universities compete for the best researchers and everything. And then you have to produce.
Okay.
And so the whole incentive structure on the people who really are pushing this is against being honest about what's going on. That's why we wrote this book.
It's worth noting also that this has been happening. By some estimates, 80 to 85% of the job losses in manufacturing that occurred in the early 2000s were actually due. We paid attention to offshoring, we paid attention to globalization.
Yes.
But what we didn't pay attention to is the fact that 80 to 85% of jobs that were lost because of automation. And that's something that no one thinks about that, because automation makes it more efficient, and that's a plus. We like using more resources more efficiently. We like using people more efficiently and being able to take advantage of their talents. But what gets hidden is that there is a very real cost. Are those jobs being replaced? Some of them are.
Yes.
Are they being replaced with the same jobs? No. Are they high quality jobs? Not always.
That's right. That's right.